His topic today is, can science and religion be reconciled? So I'm not going to go further into this introduction. I'm just going to introduce John Milton. Oh, over here.
Thank you. I feel like Janis Jackson with this thing on me. Yeah, I know. I'm trying to turn it on. Okay now? No?
Oh, I can speak over. Oh, all right. Great. I'm talking because Margaret's entreaty for speakers was so persuasive that I fell for it. This is the first time I've talked on this topic, so please indulge me if I read off my notes more than I really should. I'm sure most of you know more about this topic than I do and have your own opinions about it, so I'll try to leave time at the end, 10 minutes or so, for any comments or opinions that you have about the subject, about science and religion. As you could tell from my brag sheet, I haven't decided what I want to be when I grow up yet. I have quite a few degrees, mostly in science and engineering, but I've spent most of my academic career teaching writing and communication skills. Not that I'm particularly good at it. Okay, a few words about me and my namesake. So I've spent most of my career teaching graduate students to write effectively and truthfully. The other John Milton, if you know who I'm talking about, if you've ever read or studied English literature, as you know, he sought to justify the ways of God to men. Not that I'm going to try to do that today. Since that time, of course, most poets and artists have been trying to justify the ways of men to God, successfully or not. He believed, as I do, and I'm sure most of you do, that the aim of education should be to arouse the love of learning. He was a humanist, and he was a very religious person, but unwittingly he helped to sow the seeds of a lack of sympathy for God. If you've read Paradise Lost or even read Cole's version of it, it's easy to make a caricature of religion and God from Paradise Lost. You know, the old man in the sky, the God of the Sistine Chapel pointing to Adam, that sort of thing. The whole idea of heaven and hell that Dante talked about as well. So that's the image of God and heaven and hell and religion that we've inherited from Milton, more so than from the Bible very often. That's where a lot of our religion, at least the Christian West, that's where a lot of our religious ideals come from. Okay, let me talk a little bit about definition and etymologies. One of my degrees is in linguistics, and so I'm particularly fond of the origin of words. Science. The word science, where does it come from? What does it mean? It comes, it's the Latin scientia, and it means knowledge. But more specifically, it means to distinguish between things, to divide them or separate them. And so science tends to divide, separate, categorize, classify, that sort of thing. The word religion, what does it mean? Well, there's an argument among linguists of where the word religion comes from. One side of the argument says that it's related to the word for unite or bind, to bring together, religio, like the word ligament, to unite or bind together. But another derivation suggests that it means to consider or study carefully. So, on the one hand, science seems to divide knowledge, and religion is supposed to unite it, at least according to the etymologies of the word. So it's very interesting the way the two words balance each other, and hopefully the concepts do too. Before I go on, let me ask you, how many people here believe that there is a conflict between science and religion? That scientific philosophy or attitudes and religious philosophy and attitudes are diametrically opposed. So maybe, I don't know, I'm estimating maybe a third or a half. And how many people do not believe there's any essential conflict between science and religion? That's maybe a third or a little less, maybe. How about the rest? How many people don't know? Or don't care, I should say. Oh, not too many. Most people seem to have an opinion one way or the other, okay? Well, I'm sure many of you will disagree with what I have to say, so I'll leave some time at the end for you to heckle me or throw things or whatever. I think it's certainly true. I think many of us would agree that there's something lost in translation, as the movie has it. Many scientists think that religion is just science done badly. That the origins of stories about the natural wonders, lightning, and these sorts of things is just primitive science and not very well thought out, or with very little evidence, and not falsifiable. But many religious people think that science is just basically a religion. It's all faith. Science is really faith. So scientists and religious people often don't talk to one another very, very effectively. Scientific categories are relatively well defined. When a scientist talks about a subject, he knows more or less what he's talking about, and he's supposed to be able to communicate it effectively. But religious people have trouble sometimes defining their categories. Science progresses by narrowing its focus, by dividing the world into parts, as the etymology suggests. The language of religion, on the other hand, is often very poetic. The language of science is often very prosaic, prose-oriented. That's not always true. How many of you have read Thomas Lewis's The Lives of a Cell? If you haven't, I strongly recommend you read Lives of a Cell. He was a medical scientist, I think at Harvard, I'm not sure, but it's a wonderful book if you're interested in science or religion. Don't get me wrong, I think that there are differences between a theist and non-theist point of view. A theist, somebody who believes in God and believes that God revealed himself through religions. There are differences. One of the most striking, of course, is that theists believe in two worlds. Non-theists believe in one. What you see is what you got. I would argue that the prophets, the great leaders, the great revealers of religion actually concentrated on this world more than they did on the next. Okay, the conflict. Forgive me, I'm going to read off my notes here. As I say, I'm not an expert in this area. At many points in history, religious and political fundamentalism has reared its ugly head. Actually, that cliche comes from Milton. This conversation, by the way, the conflict between science and religion has been hijacked by, as you well know, by American politicians. If you Google war on science and war on religion, you get, in each case, 250,000 hits. And they're all from Republicans and Democrats, mainly of the recent elections. What is it? Obama waged a war on religion, and the Republicans waged a war on science, according to the polar opposites. Now, there are a group of people who are often referred to as the new atheists. So there are people like Richard Dawkins, Dan Demmett, Christopher Hitchens, who passed away recently. Dawkins is best known for his book, The God Delusion. Christopher Hitchens is well known for a book called God is Not Great. I'm jumbling this, but by the way, Allahu Akbar. I'm not pronouncing it correctly. The Arabic Allahu Akbar. We often see that on news broadcasts, right? Of Muslims waving Qurans and with one hand and a torch in the other, screaming Allahu Akbar. Anybody knows what that means?
God is great.
Actually, it doesn't. It doesn't mean God is great. It means God is greater. And there's all the difference in the world between those two statements. Where does God is greater first appear in print? It doesn't appear in the Quran. At least not first. It first appears in the Gospel of John, in the Bible. And it's very clear from the context that God is greater means that God is unknowable. God is greater than the mind of man can conceive. Look it up and you'll see that that's true. So we, we often have distorted or overly simplistic views of this religious debate. I've got to emphasize right off that I'm not a Muslim, by the way, but I'm going to refer to attitudes of the West toward Islam. So the new atheists, they argue for the abandonment of religious belief and a purely secular point of view. By the way, the word secular is interesting, has an interesting etymology. The word secular means of this generation. Very limited. It's a very limited definition. Secular people are concerned about the needs and requirements of the current generation only. So a little bit different than what you often think of. And they often say that the world can or should be converted to secular humanism. Personally, I think it's a very naive point of view. First of all, I don't think the world can be converted, and I don't believe the world should be converted to secular humanism. I'll try to explain why. And many of these new atheists, by the way, are themselves very fundamentalist in their approach to the whole question. If you read Dawkins or you read Hitchens, they take a very fundamentalist, extreme, and sometimes not very historically informed point of view to their subject. Again, this is my opinion. I'm sure that many of you would disagree with that, but it's my 15 minutes of fame.
45, not 15.
Oh, good, 45, great. I think this point of view has many weaknesses. Let me try to enumerate a couple. One is that it doesn't have any interesting motivational story. Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, all the world's great religions have wonderful, interesting, inspiring motivational stories. There's nothing like that behind secular humanism, unless we refer to these people who are supposed to be the saints of secular humanism, like Galileo. And they're really not. I'll get to that a little later. And it doesn't have any realistic psychology either, unlike religions do. The real problem, of course, that the atheists, especially the new atheists, attack is dogma. And dogma is a problem. But dogma is not restricted to religion. Scientists can be just as dogmatic as religious people can. And I've experienced it many times in my own academic career. I've seen scientists from different departments arguing with one another, jockeying for power, or within the same department or whatever. So nobody's immune to dogma. No group of people are. Excuse me. However, religion can be an excuse for ceasing to learn. And there are people who claim to be religious. There are believers who shut the door in the face of knowledge or science or education or whatever. So I'm not excusing that. The problem is that absolute truth, people claim to have absolute truth, whether they're religious or scientific or whatever, that notion of scientific truth, that notion of absolute truth is immutable, and that's a problem. This is the tragedy in both religion and science. If we stop learning, we die. It's that simple. Life is about learning. Life is about change. This is the nature of the world that we live in. There is no immutable, absolute truth. If you're a fundamentalist Christian, you might disagree with me. But all the fundamentalist Christians are at church, right? I hope. I'm throwing it here. I'm sure many of you believe we're at a stage of our intellectual development where we cannot accept dogma in any area of knowledge or learning, whether it's science or religion, whatever science, whatever religion is, whatever philosophy it is, we cannot accept dogma anymore. Something we have to keep in mind when we talk about religion and science, and it's something that often doesn't occur to people who don't have much scientific background or haven't done much reading in science, is that science is not value-free. For many years, we believed that that science was value-free. If you talk to one of these atheistic advocates of pure science, or naturalism as it's called, they argue that science is value-free. But many scientific philosophers and historians have shown that really it is not. And I'll talk a little bit about that. The physicist, Michael Polanyi, I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, he spoke of something called tacit knowledge. And he argued that we believe more than we can prove. Now, he's a physicist speaking. And that we know more than we can say. That the positivist view, that's a naturalistic view, where there is all that exists is what we can sense with our five senses, that enterprise is naive, that it cannot be correct. Another scientific historian, Thomas Kuhn, wrote a book called about scientific revolutions. And he explained that science often proceeds through a series of revolutions, that it's not as progressive and systematic as we often think it is. The Copernican, the Einsteinian, the Darwinian revolutions were just that. They overthrew old concepts of science. They were new paradigms, was his term. He argued that scientific theories are not linear. They progress in these quantum leaps, so to speak. Oh, by the way, before I go on, Copernicus. Do many of you know the story? Copernicus is a very interesting story. Copernicus, of course, is the guy who supposedly rediscovered or proved through mathematical means that the universe, that the world and the sun, the solar system, is not geocentric, but heliocentric. It's not that the Earth is not the center around which the sun revolves, but that the Earth revolves around the sun. How many people saw the sunrise this morning? How many people have in their lives seen the sunrise? Actually, none of you have, because the sun doesn't rise. The Earth revolves. I know. You're going to hate me for that. You know, when I used to teach scientific logic, I would always challenge the students, and I'd always know what they would answer. I would always say, okay, tell me one observable natural phenomenon about which you can say there is no doubt. And they would always say, oh, there is no doubt that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. And so I did that. Of course, there's always doubt in science. We are creatures of doubt. The world we live in is a world of doubt, and it should be. I interrupted myself. Yeah, scientific theories are not lead. Oh, Copernicus, I forgot. Copernicus, of course, was a Polish monk, and he was a mathematician. And how did he arrive at this proof that the Earth is the center of the solar system? In their view, the center of the universe, rather than the Earth. At that time, the Pope of the Catholic Church had a real problem. The Gregorian calendar was, I think, 11 minutes out of sync each year. And between the time of the Council of Nicaea, that's Constantine, when all of the creeds of the Catholic Church, and actually most of the creeds of the Christian world today were inscribed, were written in stone, so to speak. That Christ, for example, is the literal Son of God, that that God has three parts, God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Ghost, that whole thing. Now, of course, at the time of Constantine, many Christians didn't believe that at all. But he gathered the most powerful bishops of the time, and through whatever political power negotiations, they decided that this is the way this is what Christians should believe. Well, since that, between the time of the Nicene Council and the time of the Council of Trent, the Christian calendar was out by, I've forgotten, a number of weeks, I believe. So clergy, priests, bishops had a real problem. How did they know that they were celebrating Easter at the same time that the bishops 1,000 years earlier had celebrated it? So what they needed was an astronomer and a mathematician who could correct the calendar. Well, they asked, the Pope asked Copernicus, who was a well-known Polish mathematician, if he could come to Trent and fix the calendar for him. He said, "Are you kidding?" He said, "Nobody knows any of this." But he took it as a challenge. And for the next, I've forgotten what it was, 20 years or so, he sat down and he figured out that the only way you could correct the calendar was to put the Earth at the middle of the solar system rather than the Sun. And this was no big deal. Sorry, well, shows how confused I am. Actually, this was no big deal for many of the clergy at the time and for the Pope at the time because it was just theoretical, right? The Earth isn't really the center. It's just a sort of a theoretical assumption, like quantum mechanics. How many of us understand quantum mechanics, you know? Yeah, right. This podium isn't really here, you know, it's all just thin air, you know, right, well, okay. Okay, anyway, that's the story of Copernicus, interesting. Now the problem is that if when you think about the position of people who argue totally for the replacement of religion by science, and you think of the state of the world today, where do most of the scientists in the world work? They work for the military-industrial complex. You know, what have been the results of science? Well, there have been many wonderful technological results of science. Okay, every time a new electronic gadget comes out, I want it. You know, and I've got it. But there's a growing cynicism about the direction of humanity's progress. Are we going in the right direction? The greenhouse gases, the CO2 in the atmosphere. Go to China. Go to any city in China. I've spent the last 21 years in China, in various cities in China. There are many cities in China where you can't breathe. You can't see across the street. And people are not, Chinese people are not stupid. This is the price that they feel they've had to pay or been forced to pay for so-called technological, scientific, economical progress. Science does not give humanity a direction. We need to find that direction elsewhere. Science does what we tell it to do. Technology does what we tell it to do. Can we measure progress purely in material terms? If we do, then we've got the unbridled consumerism of 7 billion people. Wait till China catches up to America. Wait till every Chinese person, wait till the Chinese have as many cars as Americans and Canadians do, and Europeans do. And tell me if you want to live in that kind of world. Okay. I know I'm going to get lost in terms of time, but objections to religion. Let's get down to the meat of the atheists' objections to religion. There are many, and I won't go into all of them, but let me talk about a few. First of all, many people accuse religions of being violent. The history of religion has been one of violence and bloodshed and torment and torture, well, is it really true? Of course, there's been a lot of it. But only a fraction of the violent deaths in the 20th century, keep in mind, are attributable to religious belief. The dogmatic political mythologies, such as communism, racist nationalism, those are what are to blame for most of these deaths. World Wars I and II were fought for largely nationalistic or racist ideals, not religious ideals. You might argue the opposite. I'll give you a chance to throw something at me later. I see a lot of wincing on faces. And those are dogmatic mythologies, as far as I'm concerned. And as I said before, I think scientists can be just as vindictive as any medieval clergyman. Most cannot anymore burn you at the stake, but they can destroy your reputation, and they very often do. And I'll give you examples of that. And one good example is Edison. Edison, who many of us think of as the great technologist and inventor and scientist, and of course he was. He had a cadre of, I've forgotten what, 15 people who did most of the stuff for him. One young man from Italy, I think, wasn't it, named Telsa, came to work for him. And And when Edison didn't like Tulsa's ideas, they seemed to contradict his own, i.e. Edison believed in direct current, and Tulsa proposed alternate current, which of course we all use today. Edison promptly fired him. Tesla, sorry, yes. What did I say? Oh, what is Tulsa? I have a list, sorry. Yeah, thank you. Please correct me. What did I want to say? Yeah, so Edison promptly spent the rest of his life trying to ruin his Tesla's reputation. Rather than blaming religion for all of humanity's ills, we need to heal the split between what Rubinstein, an author of medieval history, says. He calls it the culture of the heart and the culture of the head. Now that's an oversimplification, I think, but essentially that seems to be what's going on today. Now, related to religious violence, so the claim of religious violence is religious bigotry. Religion, of course, can be embraced because it gives you a sense of superiority. I'm a Christian, those dumb Arabs and Muslims, you know, I've got the right religion kind of idea. And to identify enemies. We know that happens a lot in American politics, you know. Those Muslims, let's go and kill them all, huh? Or whatever. But claims of uniqueness, superiority, exclusion, bigotry, these have no place in the world that we live in. And the question is, are religions necessarily divisive? Religious communities have lived productively in harmony for very long stretches of time in human history. For 700 years, the Moors ruled Spain. And for most of that time, it was a peaceful, coexisting society where Jews, Christians, and Muslims studied together, advanced scientific knowledge together. Of course, there are many examples. Whoa. Okay. I've got another hour reading here, but I'm told I've got 10 minutes, so I'm going to have to skip a lot. Thank you. Thank you. I love you. Who was it? Yeah, there have been lots of examples that we can point to of so-called religious intolerance in the world today. We've got the Bosnian Wars, the Rwandan Wars. What's happening in the Middle East today might be attributable to religion. The rise of fundamentalism that's led to these things has historically often been the result of profound neglect of what I would say are the deep roots and issues of religion. These things happen when the very fundamentals of religion are ignored. The irony is that fundamentalism often doesn't address the fundamentals of the religion. And often they result from political pressures that have nothing to do with religion. Religion, again, in my view, is no more evil than science. Both can be used as excuses for bigotry. As I said, the rebirth of science in the 17th and 18th centuries corresponded to the growth of CO2 in the atmosphere. Thank you, science. Science cannot determine the nature of progress, and we know what happens when progress is unguided. As I said, rampant consumerism, where all the billions of people in the world are going to be vying for the same resources. They all belong to Canadians and Americans, of course. We don't want the others to get them. A real danger in the criticism of religion is that it can very easily turn into the same bigotry that it condemns. An example is anti-Semitism. And anti-Semitism, by the way, isn't just against Jews. Jews are not the only Semites in the world. The Arabs are Semites as well. And the anti-Semitism that's most prevalent today in the West is Islamophobia. The great religious leaders, for example, Moses, the Buddha, Jesus, Muhammad, they stood against injustice. There's no question in history. They stood against barbarity and ignorance. When Muhammad came, the Arabs were burying their daughters in the sand. Infanticide was very common. Okay, if I'm going to leave time for comments, and I really want to, I want to let you get even. I don't want to, let me see what I can skip here. No, I'll just go on and shut me up when the time is up.
Please come back.
Okay. So the question is, does religious thought progress? Is there can religion evolve, or can it undergo the revolutions that science seems to? That's a big question. Up until the middle of the 19th century, we overlooked the evolution of the natural world. We had no clue about evolution. Darwin introduced the concepts of natural selection and evolution. And by the way, that was quickly taken up by most of the public and misused sometimes. But, and more recently, we've learned about the nature of scientific revolutions, as I said. But what we often overlooked are the great revolutions in religion and the evolution of religious ideas. If we think of the separate religions as actually revolutions, as progressive, rather than as competing, if we can go as far back as our history allows us, of course, and look at the very early Judaic prophets, Abraham, the early Persian prophet like Zoroaster. We look at the Indian prophet like the Buddha, and then come later in history where we have Moses, and then Christ, and Muhammad, and Baha'u'llah. We can see them as not competing, but progressive, because they all teach essentially the same message. I firmly believe if you study the fundamentals of religion, you see that they're saying the same thing, that the holy books all say the same thing. There's no reason for animosity between religions. Atheists don't look at it that way, or naturalistic scientists don't look at it that way, of course. The critics of religion say that nothing is forever, and that this is the basis of science, of course. And they're right. All cultures and religions have finite lifespans, and they're often bracketed by what I'm referring to as these progressive revolutions in ideas, in religious or scientific ideas. You know what eschatology is? It's the study or the expectation of the end of the world. We were supposed to have the end of the world according to the Mayan calendar, misinterpretations of the Mayan calendar. In the middle of the 19th century, many people believed it was the end of the world, prophesied by the Bible or by the Quran. And many religious denominations began as a result of that, when the world didn't appear to end. I'd argue that the world has ended. It's ended many times. It ends every time one of us dies for that person individually. But it also ends collectively. See, he agrees. The world ends culturally and collectively whenever we have one of these grand revolutions in science or religion. It changes the world. We live in a different universe than our ancestors did. We live in a different universe than people did 100 years ago. I don't need to go into the details of medicine and technology to establish that. Evolution, not only revolution, but evolution. Religious ideas evolved as well. Early Judaic thought was affected by Zoroaster, for example, and by Babylon. Okay, so as you know, from your knowledge of the Bible, the Jews were taken into captivity by the Babylonians, right? I sat by the river of Babylon and wept, or that's from Abba, right? But I think it's biblical, okay? And much of the Jewish nation was in captivity in Babylon for how many years? 70 years, or whatever. 700, yeah, more like it. Well, did they take anything from Babylonian culture? Well, it was very common in those days for religions to be permeable. Now, many Jews would argue that Judaism, or Christians would argue, is a totally pure thing. I think if you look at the history of the evolution of ideas, it's not necessarily true. We had references to angels. Angels first appeared in the historical record in Babylon. The idea of Babylonian angels entered the biblical mind, the mind of the ancient Jews. Who released the Jews from captivity in Babylon? It was the Persians. I think it was Cyrus who released the Jews from captivity in Babylon when he invaded and conquered Babylon. And many Jews remained in Persia, what we now call Iran, after that. And what did they absorb from the culture of Iran at that period? They absorbed the ideas of Zoroaster, or at least the ideas that had been inherited from Zoroaster, the great Persian prophet. You know, Zoroastrianism, many people think of the worship of fire. Fire, of course, is just a symbol for God. But, and what was that great idea from Zoroastrianism? The devil. There's no belief in the devil before that period. And Zoroastrians, or I should say some Zoroastrians believe that there are two gods. And this is how you justify evil in the world. Why is there, if God is good, if God is complete goodness, complete holiness, complete whatever, how can there be evil in the world? Oh, well, maybe there's another God, and he's evil. And you have these two gods fighting each other. And that idea comes from Zoroastrianism. Of course, that evil God we call Satan. And of course, it was Milton, John Milton, who made this very popular. Yeah, so it went the other way as well, of course. Jewish ideas profoundly affected ancient Greek philosophy. And many of the ideas of Plato and Aristotle have their origins in Judaic thought. At least many scholars believe so. But religious ideas can become corrupted just as scientific ideas can. And I'm sure you know many scientific ideas are very corrupted. Charles Darwin, when he wrote The Origin of Species, became very popular. Well, what happened? Many politicians took this as an excuse for their own political ends. Social Darwinism. Let's see now. If the strongest of the species survive, that means that war is a good thing. Right? Let's go and kill all those lesser human beings, and then we will triumph. This is a very fascist idea, of course. The whole idea of the purity of the species came out of this misapplication of Darwin's ideas, a corruption of scientific ideas. Am I close to? Okay, I better. I've got 1,000 other things to say, but I better shut up and let you get even with me. So if you like, I'll come back again later. But yes, ma'am. We'll pass the microphone around.
We will pass the microphone to you, but you need to stand.
I hope you will come back soon.
Thank you very much.
You said something early on, that we die when we stop learning. That was extremely profound.
Well, it's not my idea. But
I know, but I mean, the point, no. I would also like to credit you for your humbleness. You have a connection with your audience. You are never preaching. And so many people in the academic world are preachers, and you are not.
Well, wait, I want to sing Hallelujah. By the way, the word Hallelujah is Arabic and Hebrew. Hebrew and Arabic is the same language, but I'm sorry.
I would like you to think on one subject. If you look at the audience, you will see more than 50% females. Now, I'm sure that you're not aware of it, but I don't believe there was any female mentioned in any of your authors or so forth. And this man right here, who's a good friend of me, will comment. I would like you to give some feedback on death. There are many of us here that are 80 or over, so we've already beat the system. Now, the question is, what happens after
Okay, ready? You ready? Okay. Now, Christ didn't tell you, Muhammad didn't tell you, Baha'i didn't tell you, and I'm not going to tell you because I don't know. Okay, sorry. It's a mystery. Oh, by the way, you know about the 72 virgins? Speaking of gender inequality, there's no such mention of that anywhere in the Quran or in Islam. No such thing. Yeah, sorry.
John, I just want to make a comment. I saw a really interesting bumper sticker one day that said, "I hate bigots."
And he's right. Religion is necessary because originally it was there to control the masses.
Well, that's what Marx believed. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
And we know what happened to Marxism, right? Yeah. Stalin. Yeah.
Yeah, he's dead.
Yeah, but Stalin had his own way, and Mao had their own way of controlling the masses, didn't they? Yeah.
They're all dead, you notice.
Yeah, thank God.
Seriously, there was a discussion at Oxford University about the origins of religion. They said that if the world was developed by God, he made a bit of a mess of it, because the world was, as Father knew, was 3.5 million years old. And during that period, most of the animals and foliage has been destroyed. I think it's 99.9999. And one would ask, what was the point?
Well, if you take, shall I answer? If you take a purely naturalistic view, of course there was no point. The problem is we have this very anthropomorphic view of God, the old man in the sky who's he got the strings and we're all just his puppets. I don't think that's a very religious point. Can I read a poem to you? Do you know Naming of Parts by Henry Reed? Second World War, British poet, one of my favorite poets. I think you might think it has nothing to do with religion, but I'm going to read it anyway. Like many of you, I've played many parts in my life. At one time, I was in the Canadian militia, Princess Louise Fusiliers. We were an artillery branch. I was still a student at that time, and we just marched around with our rifles. Lee Enfields 303, if you know what they are. Didn't have the destructive power of the automatic guns that are killing children today. This is one of my favorite poems, and I think it has a deeply religious meaning. Not a big review. How many people have been in the military? Okay, for those of you who haven't, don't be frightened. Today, we have naming of parts. Yesterday, we had daily cleaning. And tomorrow morning, we shall have what to do after firing. But today we have naming of parts. Japonica glistens like coral in all the neighboring gardens. And today, we have naming of parts. This is the lower sling swivel, and this is the upper sling swivel, whose use you will see when you're given your slings. And this is the piling swivel, which in your case you have not got. The branches hold in the gardens their silent, eloquent gestures, which in our case we have not got. This is the safety catch, which is always released with an easy flick of the thumb. And please do not let me see any of you using his finger. You can do it quite easy if you have any strength in your thumb. The blossoms are fragile and motionless, never letting anyone see any of them using their finger. And as you can see is the bolt. The purpose is to open the breech, as you can see. We slide it rapidly backwards and forwards. We call this easing the spring. And rapidly backwards and forwards, the early bees are salting and fumbling the flowers. They call it easing the spring. They call it easing the spring. It's perfectly easy if you have any strength in your thumb, like the bolt and the breech and the cocking piece and the point of balance, which in our case we have not got. And the almond blossoms silent in all of the gardens, and the bees going backwards and forward. For today, we have naming of parts.